On one side, we see the minimalist digital interface of a ride-hailing app. On the other, the dense, unstandardized reality of an African urban street. Transport planners frequently assume that shared mobility in African markets operates as the Silicon Valley model, arriving a decade late. The sharing economy acts as a combination of distinct systemic variables, rather than a single monolithic force. While the baseline engine of shared mobility is global, its components require a complete rebuild to survive in developing markets. Local conditions dictate how technology is adopted, often overriding the intended behavior of the platform designers. This blueprint maps 4 drivers of the global sharing economy: technological, economic, social, and environmental. The technological quadrant is the enabler, the computational chassis matching supply and demand. The remaining 3 provide the fuel: economic, social, and environmental pressures driving humans to share. Adoption frequently stalls in markets with strong human motivation but a missing localized enabler. The specific match between the tool and the environment determines whether the system actually moves. To accurately read a new transport market, an operations manager must decouple human desire from technological capacity. The sharing of underused assets is an ancient human behavior. The modern breakthrough achieved scale and real-time capability. Historically, the core economic barrier to this kind of sharing was the high level of transaction costs. Consider a pre-app journey from Kaneishi to Spintex in Accra. The passenger walks to the road, flags down taxis one by one, and negotiates a fare from a position of weakness, while bearing the physical risk of carrying cash at night. Solving this required the specific convergence of the smartphone, GPS, the mobile internet, and digital payment. A digital platform is an algorithm designed to collapse these transaction costs to near zero. In the post-app reality, instant geographic matching, pre-agreed pricing, and cashless security replace the curbside haggle. The technological enabler organizes existent capacity with frictionless efficiency without adding new physical capacity to a city's road network. Once the technology is in place, user adoption is driven by the primary economic motivator of idle capacity. A standard private saloon car in Accra spends 95% of its life parked. When a platform matches that idle vehicle with paying passengers, it releases trapped economic value without the need for a new physical asset. On the demand side, this drives a shift toward valuing the utility of access over the status of ownership. Scaling these transactions among strangers required the introduction of manufactured trust. Platforms engineer this trust through a toolkit of verified driver identities, real-time trip tracking, and accumulated user ratings. These systems convert an individual's reputation into a tangible, load-bearing form of capital. A driver's high rating acts as the collateral that guarantees the next trip. Money gets a driver and rider to the door, but manufactured, system-level trust is the factor that allows them to enter the vehicle together. While these 4 families of drivers are universal, their weighting changes radically on the African continent. The Western technological enabler relied on an assumption of universal credit card ownership. In regions lacking that banking infrastructure, the Northern model fails. African markets skipped a technological generation entirely, a pattern known as leapfrogging. As we see on this mobile device displaying the M-Pesa menu, the African sharing economy bypassed traditional banking by utilizing mobile money on basic hardware. High-density urban pressure makes shared mobility a necessity. With thin transit and severe congestion, as seen in this gridlock, the platform becomes a lifeline. African markets adapted the technological enabler directly to the physics and economics of their own environment, rather than waiting for Western infrastructure to arrive. A persistent myth claims that Silicon Valley invented shared mobility. The true foundation lies in the paratransit base, the vast informal transport networks that have organized African cities for decades. This red trotro parked near a bridge represents the baseline informal transport vehicle for the region. Viewing these minibuses operating mid-flow demonstrates that these vehicles have functioned as complex, demand-responsive transport networks for generations. This Okada carrying passengers down an unpaved road highlights the absolute necessity of motorcycle taxis in gridlocked or underdeveloped environments. Digital platforms digitized a paratransit culture that was already deeply established. The app provided a coordination layer for behaviors that predated the smartphone by decades. This creates a specific tension. The transaction becomes formalized and traceable, but the worker operating the vehicle remains informal. This stands in stark contrast to the northern model, which focuses almost entirely on maximizing the utilization of the private four-door passenger car. The African sharing economy functions as a direct evolution of the minibus and the motorcycle. This comparative matrix plots high-income markets against African markets across technological, economic, and social driver categories. For operations managers diagnosing a stalled service, there are two distinct pathways: a missing technological enabler, like mobile payment, or a missing motivator, like cultural trust. Strong African motivators, like extreme congestion and economic necessity, required only the mobile money enabler to ignite mass adoption. Designing pricing models or worker protections based on northern assumptions of credit cards and casual labor will result in inherent failure. As seen in this dense Ghanaian market street, integrating digital platforms with the informal paratransit system is the only viable path for the future of African transit. Operational success in these markets depends on how perfectly platform code adapts to the physics, economics, and culture of the local street. The average private car spends roughly 22 hours a day doing absolutely nothing. It sits completely parked, taking up space. Economists refer to this as idle capacity. You pay a massive premium to own a machine designed for movement, but the vast majority of its useful lifespan is wasted. It is trapped economic value. Before the internet, renting out that parked car for a few hours was nearly impossible. The sheer logistical nightmare of finding a willing stranger, negotiating a fair price, and making sure they wouldn't steal your vehicle simply outweighed the few dollars you might earn. This industry expanded by optimizing what already existed, removing the specific coordination barriers that previously kept those millions of vehicles stationary. That friction is known as transaction costs, and starting around the year 2008, those costs suddenly collapsed to near zero. The collapse started with the global financial crisis. As household budgets tightened, people were forced to do more with less. They needed ways to earn extra money from the things they already owned, and they needed cheaper alternatives to buying new assets outright. But the desire to save money meant nothing without a way to actually connect people. The solution arrived at exactly the same time, in the form of the first mainstream smartphones. Suddenly, millions of people had mobile internet and GPS satellite positioning sitting right in their pockets. By combining intense economic pressure with pocket-sized, location-aware computers, sharing an asset evolved from a neighborhood favor into an automated, global industry. This new industry operated entirely differently than traditional transit companies. It poured no concrete and purchased zero fleets. Instead, it builds digital platforms acting as invisible dispatchers. Matching algorithms locate a waiting passenger and instantly connect them with a willing driver. Owning neither the vehicles nor the labor, it avoids massive capital costs, simply taking a commission from every match. The actual product being sold is the highly efficient coordination of existing resources. Yet, an algorithm alone cannot account for the willingness to step into an unidentified vehicle at night. Before these platforms existed, most people considered that level of vulnerability a non-starter. Platforms solved this by engineering what researchers call manufactured trust. They replaced reliance on corporate brands with a system of verified identities, live trip tracking, and two-way peer ratings. If a driver has a 4.9 rating across 2,000 trips, they are effectively vouched for by 2,000 previous passengers. This manufactured trust allowed a specific cultural shift to take hold in Western cities. Younger consumers began deciding that on-demand access to a vehicle was actually more convenient and cheaper than holding on to the traditional status symbol of owning one outright. Technology, economic pressure, environmental awareness, and trust. Together, these factors drive the growth of the sharing economy in the global north. But this blueprint relies on a specific infrastructure, near universal credit card adoption. When these platforms expanded into the developing world, observers assumed they were watching the Silicon Valley model arrive a few years late. That assumption is wrong. The Western blueprint fractured almost immediately in Africa because it depended heavily on widespread credit card infrastructure, something that simply didn't exist across most of the continent. Rather than waiting for traditional banking to catch up, African markets engaged in leapfrogging. They skipped the credit card generation entirely, utilizing basic mobile phone networks and local mobile money systems to handle the digital payments directly. The users' motivations were completely different too. People were driven by the urgent daily necessity of surviving severely congested cities where formal public transit was thin. The absence of Western infrastructure forced the evolution of a highly distinct, localized variant, running on mobile money and necessity. The behavioral foundation of shared on-demand mobility is a long-standing fixture of African transit, existing informally decades before the first smartphone app. For decades, African cities have run on a vast informal transport sector, what planners call paratransit. Many buses like the Trotro in Ghana or the Matatu in Kenya operate dynamically, adjusting their routes and schedules based on actual demand. Digital platforms laid a matching interface over this massive, pre-existing paratransit foundation, rather than introducing the concept of sharing to the region. Today, you see the result on the streets. Global algorithmic platforms deeply entangled with the chaotic, physical realities of local African transit. The sharing economy is not a fixed Silicon Valley export. It is a universal set of economic drivers, and it will seamlessly adapt to fit the specific friction, the available technology, and the established culture of whatever habitat it enters.